before I get started, how many of you are founders of companies? So about half. And how many are CEOs or senior leaders of a startup that you didn't start? Okay, so pretty much everyone. That's good because I was going to talk about founding and building a company, so it should be reasonably relevant. So we have a lot of light here, but hopefully you can see. So this is a picture of me and my wife rowing in a boat across the Pacific Ocean. And as you can see, it's pretty romantic. It was kind of nice and beautiful. And it was also life-changing in many ways because going in, we both thought we would never have a family, and we definitely don't want to have kids because life is freaking too awesome to have crying babies around. But then about a week into the row, we both pretty much the same, within a 24-hour window, decided that we want to have a family. So it was life-changing in many ways, and now we have a 16-month-old daughter. We did try on the boat as well, but it wasn't really a perfect environment. So she only got pregnant about a week after landing. But as you can see, it was pretty romantic. But the reality is, it was actually not like that. It was, for the most part, horrible and unexpected. And this is a real picture of, I happened to have a GoPro running when the boat was about to flip around in the middle of the Pacific. And this was one of the many moments. Within the first 2 weeks of rowing, and it took about 45 days and 3 hours total, within the first 2 weeks, we made about 3 miles of westerly progress per day. And it's about 2,400 miles to Hawaii. We made only about 3 miles west per day and about 50 miles south. And I was already secretly, I called up through the satellite phone to some of my friends to organize a landing in Mexico because I was absolutely certain that there's no freaking way we'll end up in Hawaii, because you do the math. 2,400 divided by 3, it's 800 days. So we had packed food for 80 days. That's just not going to happen. And I became so miserable that I could barely get into the oars every day because obviously we slept a little bit. And I stopped brushing my teeth, and I was just totally, absolutely ready to quit. And the only reason I kept going was actually my wife, who said, well, it doesn't matter if we go 1 mile a day, we just keep going. Eventually we'll get there. But the reality really was nothing like what you probably have read or what you saw in the first picture. So here's another picture of an awesome moment. This happens to be the day Trulia went public. It's me and my wife jumping in front of New York Stock Exchange. Probably never jumped that high before and haven't jumped that high ever after. Now IPO is, it's just a vehicle to raise more capital and gives you access to some other things as well. But for most entrepreneurs, certainly for me as a first-time entrepreneur and immigrant, it was kind of, it's like the milestone. That's the end. It's not the end. It's just a new beginning. But it was a wonderful moment. And that's what most people know about Trulia. Like, great idea, great execution, went public, and it's a decent consumer brand now, and to some extent changed an industry. But the reality is this: my everyday was like this, basically a sausage factory, and I loved it because I love sausage. So when we launched the company first, it was September 2005. We launched the service and the company as a real estate search company, similar to what you might think of Kayak today. So it's a travel search. So world had sort of moved from portal-centric world to vertical search. So we launched, and we had just raised a couple of $1 million. So we knew that we want to have some cash in the bank because if anything happens, at least we have the buffer. So we waited for the wire to clear from the VCs, literally like the Friday, and then Monday we sort of opened up the website and launched to the world. Within 2 weeks, the organized real estate industry came after us, and many real estate brokerage firms sued us, or sent a cease and desist letter saying, you can't show any of this content or any of the materials that you have on your website because it's ours, so you have to take it down. So in about a week, we became a search engine with no search results. And it's obviously not a very wonderful place to be as first-time, or at least first-time founder in the Valley, and you had just raised money. Actually, at that point, I thought there's no freaking way we can get forward. There's no way. And we were supposed to be nationwide within like 3 months. We initially launched in California. And then, so what ended up happening, I was basically traveling around the country for about 200 days a year for 2 years to every single state to meet with the real estate companies and explain why we're actually good for the industry and why they should work with us. But for me, as a physicist by training, and I had spent my whole life in Korea in tech, starting a tech company and trying to build an internet company, I thought this is freaking, this film, so I'm used the right F word, freaking crazy. Like I can barely speak English, and I'm traveling around the country meeting 60-year-old real estate brokers who are third-generation brokers. Like they think, well, that's not for me. I don't really like it, but that's the only way to push the company forward. So that's just one of the sausage factory moments that I personally experienced. And I often get this question of, so when did you feel like you guys had made it? And the truth is that I never felt like that. It's just that the sausage got bigger and bigger and bigger. And what was spraying on the wall, there was just more of it. So before I actually get to the core of my content, if there's only one thing that you remember from my talk and you're a founder, it is that what you read from TechCrunch and what people think success looks like is absolutely, completely bullshit. Absolutely not true. For any successful company that creates something that no one has done before. So if you want to create an industry or disrupt an industry, by definition, your life is going to be what it is on the right all the time. Absolutely all the time, because you cannot know what's around the corner. If you want to start a burrito place in Mission or a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, then it may be like this. It's predictable, and you roughly know that you need to work very, very hard and what you have to do. But if you are trying to create something new, it's going to be like a sausage factory from day one until however long you run and build your company. And it's awesome if you love it, if you love, guess, sausage. So how do you then build something successfully, especially if you have no experience and you aren't uniquely qualified to really do anything, which was me. I was equipped with two things, I believe, personally. One is I have pretty good math skills, and then I have pretty good VO2 max. Those are the two things, but they don't really kind of help you to do most of the things I've done in my life. So I'm going to share a couple of stories. I call them my 5 stories because I have no freaking idea if these actually work. If you want to hear the academic view of how to build a successful company, then you have to talk to a Stanford professor who has studied thousands of companies that what actually works. So I'm just going to share 5 of my stories that I found helpful in trying to do anything extraordinary, whether that's in sports or rowing across the Pacific or building a company. All right, so I'll start with this. So I felt like I was always working too much. I enjoyed it, but I felt like just way too many hours all the time when we were building Trulia. And so I actually did kind of an inventory of my time use a few times. And this actual chart from, I don't remember which year it was. But I basically tracked my time use on 15-minute intervals so I could know what was I doing and how impactful I was. The one interesting thing that I found was more than half of my time went to uncategorized email crap. So if you work 100 hours a week or 90 hours a week, whatever that is 25 hours a week of, like, I didn't even know what I was working on. And tons of other stuff that didn't really make any sense. So this feeling of, oh my God, I have just so much work to do. One of my biggest lessons in everything that I've done that has actually gotten somewhere is you fundamentally, and by the way, this is way easier for me now building my current company after Trulia and another company before that. You just sweat the big stuff and don't focus on the small crap that doesn't make any difference. Because ultimately impact matters, and you can only drive impact if you can focus on the big stuff. And to me personally, this is my personal, as a CEO of a founder, there's really only 4 things that matter. One is people. That's hiring and firing and creating an environment where people can do the best work in their lives. Then 2 is strategy, to make sure that the people are cutting the trees in the right forest. And I think most founders don't, at least I remember my earlier years, I didn't spend too much time thinking about strategy. It's like you just keep going because you're so busy. And then 3rd one is never run out of cash. So founders should be always fundraising. And then ultimately when you're cutting those trees, you should end up with a freaking awesome product. Everything else is just sort of shining and, waving hands and BS, but those 4 things to me are the most important. And by the way, where did I take this copy paste? That's my productivity tool today. It's basically just a text file. So it's always on my desktop. So I can always see what other things I should be allocating my time on, and then I write down what do I focus on this quarter and this week. That's my simple, how do I stay focused when it feels like you're always working 100 hours a week and have a to-do list of 500 items. So how did I apply this to the row? Well, people. Of course, you choose your wife. That's the best team member for anything. Strategy. There's only like a 90-day window to try to row from California to Hawaii, which we did, because the winds change so badly that you'll just get crushed and killed. You just can't. There's a 90-day window, so it's pretty easy. Just push out at the right time. Cash an awesome product. The number one thing that I spend a lot of time is figuring out the right kind of boat. So we got a boat that is not sinkable. In fact, the kind of boat that we had, the Chilean army had tried to sink one by shooting like thousands of rounds into one similar boat, and it did not sink because there's tiny carbon fiber compartments all over the place, so you can't sink it. So for the row, that was kind of the, get my wife, there's a 90-day window, we know where we leave, and we have a boat that doesn't sink. Everything else is just freaking secondary. Once you push off, you can't come back. And once you're a couple of 100 miles off the coast, the Coast Guard can't even fly and pick you up, so you just have to go. So then you just go. So sweat the big stuff. That makes life so much more enjoyable when you're building a company, because it's very easy to sweat everything. The second story is a story of, this is my wife sleeping in the boat. And the reason I show a picture of her sleeping is we discovered something that no expert was able to tell us. So approach to the row was, let's interview people who've done something similar, because it's useful to talk to people who've already done it before, especially for us, because neither one of us were rowers. We had never sailed. We had never been in the ocean in any way, quite frankly. The first night that we experienced the overnight in the middle of the ocean was after the first day of rowing, which is sort of stupid. So we interviewed the experts, but they said, you have to sleep 2 hours, row 2 hours, sleep 2 hours, row 2 hours. That's the only way to do it, because you can't keep rowing for more than 2 hours, then you need rest. So switch on and off, on and off. One sleeps, the other rows. The downside is that after like 2 or 3 days, you start hallucinating and you really kind of fall asleep on oars, and it gets really tough. So that's what everyone told us. And we said, okay, I guess that's how you have to do it. So you end up rowing 12 hours a day each and 12 hours of sleeping. But we said, let's start first day by rowing as far as we can, like 16 hours both, and then one goes to bed, and then we go to on and off, on and off. But it was so stormy at the end of the first night that literally the waves started picking up in the middle of the night, that we said, there's no way I'm going to leave you, my lovely wife, alone on the deck rowing while I go. Like, there's no freaking way that I'm going to do that. So we both went, we put the anchor, it's like a parachute, in the water, and so we can go and sleep for 5 hours. And then wake up, and then, it was kind of morning, and continue rowing. So we did that. We felt pretty good. Second day, same thing. I don't know why the weather pattern was such that when it got dark, like the waves just started picking up, and it was like impossible to do anything on the deck. It was so dangerous. You saw one of those pictures. Like, it really was like waves just washing over the deck. So we did this for 3 or 4 days. And after 4 days, we're like, we are feeling freaking amazing. So we slept 6 hours non-stop, and then we rowed about 18 hours. So it turns out your body produces growth hormone after you really get to deep sleep. If you only sleep 2 hours, part of that goes to like washing and changing. You don't even get to deep sleep. So we sort of accidentally realized that the optimal strategy actually is to sleep about 6 hours every day, and then you row as long as you can. And I'll explain later why we were able to row 18 hours nonstop each. And so when we finished, we were feeling, after 45 days, absolutely, completely awesome. No hallucinations, anything. Every morning I woke up, it was like, it was kind of tough, but I was feeling like it's a new day. So why do I say experimentation, not experts? Like if you're disrupting an industry doing something new, every single expert will tell you it's impossible or you can't do it, because if they had a better way, they would have done it already. It's the same when we were starting Trulia. Like every single person who had been in the real estate or real estate tech said, your idea does not make any sense. We didn't get money, angel investors, nothing from anyone. And I think this is one of the reasons why sometimes, or oftentimes here, 22-year-olds even disrupt sort of enterprise markets, that you're slightly naive and you just go and you experiment and you figure out a way that is not obvious for the people who are in it. So this is me rowing on an erg, preparing for our row, breathing in and out of it's not an exhaust from a car. It measures basically carbon dioxide and oxygen going in and out. And the purpose of that is to measure what substrate your body is utilizing to produce energy. The body basically burns primarily two things. It's either sugar or fat. And the reason we were doing this was you can only row about 2 hours or 3 hours with the sugar that's in your body, but you can row, depending on how much fat you have in your body, you can row anywhere between 5 days to 50 days non-stop without eating if you're burning fat. So most of you, if you would hop on that erg and go sort of a steady pace, you'd probably burn about 60-70% sugar. So you'd probably be able to row about 4 hours, then you would bonk. We were able to get to 95 to 98% fat. And that was one of the reasons we were able to keep rowing 18 hours a day, maybe have 1 meal or 2 meals, and never feel like we are bonking or falling apart. And that allowed us to then take all the 18 hours outside of our sleep. But so how did we do that? So we did these tests every month or so, the 6 months that we were training towards the row. Just every month we were testing and seeing where we are. That's just a simple example of what we did for the row, but I've learned that it is so powerful to spend a lot of time thinking about what is it that drives you forward, and then have you and your team measure those couple of things. Because even if you don't even pay attention to improving, just the fact that you have a number in front of you, it's extremely liberating because you know what to focus on. So understanding what are the metrics or the drivers that take you or your company forward, and measuring those and putting them on the wall or where you put it. I know this Mark's room is full of sticky notes, so he hasn't yet transferred into the digital world, but you can use sticky notes too. So measure things that matter. Fourth one is every wannabe triathlete wants to always show a picture of him or herself in spandex, so I have mine here. This is a picture of me when I won the World Championships in my age group a few years ago in triathlon. And I had never done a triathlon in my life. I barely knew what it is when I moved to US 2003. I really did not have much experience. In fact, zero experience in swimming. And oftentimes people think like, oh, you must have like been doing triathlons in college or something because you've done so well. It's absolutely completely not true. It took 8 years of tiny progress every month. And then ultimately in 8 years, I got to that point. And it's interesting for me to think about team building and how people think about high performance in the Silicon Valley. There's a glorification of super smart people. It's always about like finding the superstar people into a small group and then they're going to do amazing things. I don't devalue talent. In fact, when I hire, I try to find rather amazing talent and experience because talking to experts doesn't often help. But I think it's over-glorification. I would take slightly less talented, i.e. raw IQ, people in a team that has that kind of a growth mindset where what I did after every single race, and I probably did over 8 years, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 races total, the first thing I did, whether I won or was second or 10th or 50th, was I wrote down 3 things that I learned from the training block leading into that race. And what did I learn from the race? That what can I improve? So if you can imagine the compounded return of improving over many years, it's amazing. And my favorite formula about this compounded returns and improvement is if you think of a 1% improvement every day, which in tech is like freaking nothing. You can easily learn 1% every day. So if you take 1.01 to the power of 365, which is 1% every day for a year, it's about 3,700% improvement in a year. Versus that you just sort of become complacent and I'm so freaking smart and I'm going to know all the answers, and you don't think about how can I learn more and how can I improve something. You can waste a year and make no improvement. And how it's very important as a leader, as a CEO, how do you run this or sort of drive this mindset into the team and celebrate when people are really focused on not a particular milestone, but the process of constant improvement. It's amazing how far you can get if you're just relentlessly iterating. And my last one is, I actually saw there, before we started, there were a couple of questions that were somewhat related to this point. So this is me rowing maybe after the first 5 or 6 weeks, because we had about 5 days of reasonably calm waters, and that's kind of what it looks like. I took about 1 million oar strokes to get from Monterey to Waikiki Beach, about 1 million oar strokes. And about 1 million times I thought, this hurts, and this does not feel like fun. And, you know, I'm a pretty outdoorsy and athletic person, but I have to say that I don't like swimming. One of the reasons is pretty boring because you just see the same thing. And you could say the same about rowing because you don't really see much anything. Contrary to, like, I thought we would see dolphins jumping and big blue whales and like sharks attacking and like all kinds of cool stuff. Yes, some of that happened, but for the most part, it was very boring and painful. And one of the most powerful things that I was able to do, partially thanks to my little mindfulness meditation training that I had done 4 years before, was not to think about, oh my God, what am I going to, by the way, this is one of the questions I hear, like, what did you dream of when you were, did you dream of ice cream or cold shower or the first night's sleep once you get to the shore? Actually, none of those, because the most powerful thing or trick or how to use your brain is to say, I feel the pain, my ass is hurting, my quads are hurting, my back is hurting, my shoulder is broken, it's cold or whatever it is, and I can feel it, and I'm in it, and I'm loving it. Because once you do that, like, no pain is going to stop you. And I find that in the entrepreneurial process, if you think of your life as a manager of a sausage factory, it's very important to have passion and purpose. But the reality is, for the most part, the 10 hours of every day or whatever you work, 12 hours, 14 hours, is actually freaking hard. So to embrace the process and enjoy and let it all come in and say, hey, this is part of it, is absolutely, completely critical. You can't live your entrepreneurial life by thinking, oh, I'm just going to work so hard, this is horrible and everything, but I'm going to have an IPO or whatever. You have to embrace the process, and the pain is super, super critical. And then the other element of cultivate your brain that I learned very, very hard way is, unless your startup is about packing peanuts, you're probably working with your brain as opposed to just with your hands and your time. And sleep is the #1 performance enhancing drug. So if anyone here comes to office and brags to your team that you only slept so and so many hours, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you are freaking stupid. You are not doing a good service for yourself. You're definitely not doing good service to your investors and your company. And you're setting an example for your team that you don't know the simplest thing about human physiology. And brain is what either makes or breaks your company. And sleep is the easiest and cheapest way to make it perform. But if you're in a peanut packing business, don't you worry. You can totally sleep 2 hours a night, come to office and keep packing peanuts. So that's been a big lesson for me. And I did not know that during the Trulia years. Maybe it was before I hired Mark, but I had so many nights that it was 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and ultimately I reached the point that given English is my second language, I just couldn't even remember words, and I couldn't even remember names of my colleagues. And it took me, like, I had to go that far to realize that this is freaking stupid. I'm not packing peanuts, and my brain is completely fried. So that would be my fifth. So that's 5 stories. Enjoy making sausage. That's a pretty cute picture there.
That's me on the right.
So we've got the questions back up for you. Feel free to call out the ones you like and we'll highlight them, and people keep entering them in.
So no questions from the audience. It's all.
Literally from the audience.
Okay. But there's no
I'll start.
personal.
Maybe not related to being successful.
You never answered your question. What you looked forward to most after the row? I'm curious.
What did I look forward to before landing or at the moment of landing?
Before you got to Hawaii, what were you looking forward to most?
I didn't.
Really, nothing?
I didn't. So the moment of stepping off the boat and hugging my wife was probably, I don't know, one of the most awesome, sweetest moments of my life.
Yes, I can imagine that. All right.
And what did I have after? I actually had cold sparkling water like right after, and I don't think maybe we had dinner like 7 hours after landing or something. And the last 3 hours or whatever that time was, that we actually had a very, very hard push because the winds were kind of trying to push us off the big island of Oahu, which can be dangerous. Then you just end up passing the island and you never land. It was very, very hard, but it was kind of nostalgic because it was like, this is going to be over, and it was so horrible that we're never going to do this again. So these 3 hours or whatever the time was, like, we didn't kind of want to finish, but we were forced to, because otherwise we would have just get swept away to somewhere.
Hey, Sami, can you share how you and Meredith sort of set this up so you did not kill each other on the boat?
Well, we almost killed on a boat because, so 12 hours a day we were both rowing at the same time, and then 6 was one sleeping and another rowing. But 12 hours we had time together. So we had a lot of empty space and time to fill, and we had to come up with conversation topics. And, you know, we had all kinds. We were like, what would you do in Israel if you were the president of the United States? So what would you do with North Korea? We tried to solve the world's problems, big stuff. And then small stuff, like one of my wife's questions was, which one of my friends would you marry if it wasn't me? And I went for it. So it was a close call, and she still remembers the answer, unfortunately. Don't ever answer that question. I don't know why I didn't. But how did we? So we did have a couple of tricks. One was we read the book. I think it's called Crucial Conversations or something like that. So that was one. So we wanted to learn a few techniques. How to communicate when you have real issues. So that was one. 2 was we made an agreement. Everything's water under the bridge, because we had to make a lot. There's actually, you have to make a fair amount of decisions, navigationally and others. There's some amount of tactics, not quite as much as sailing, but you have to make decisions, and they may turn out to be wrong. So one rule was everything's water under the bridge. Once we make a decision, never, ever, ever say that again to the other person, and then we just move forward. And by the way, works in a startup, especially if you have a co-founder, you have this, like, do we go left or right? What do we do? Like, that's a phenomenal rule. So that was another thing. But for us, it actually worked out very, very well, because we realized that when we are all hands on deck, it's even easier and more amazing for us as a relationship. So it worked out very well.
Do we have more questions in the audience, or do we want to go for one up there? So it's just for recording, it's not a broadcast.
You can ask finish if you want. So.
Yeah. Firstly, happy Independence Day.
Yeah, thank you.
Secondly, so it was fantastic that you were able to include your wife for the rowing experience. But how do you manage keeping relationships healthy when doing fantastic things in setting up your own company and successful ones?
How do I keep my friends and family relationships intact?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of time that is being spent on the company.
Yeah, I hired my wife into my company. No, this is true. She works for me. Well, there's a couple of things. To me, when you're happy, like you have to have the big rocks, whatever that is in your life, sweat the big stuff in life as well. To me, is to be able to do purposeful work in the service of others. It's just amazing. Like I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world. So if you can do something like that, it's way better to be very, very busy and sort of fulfilled and happy. It's much easier to keep the family, friends, all the relationships intact as well, versus like sitting on a beach and being just, you just feel like you don't have a compass where you go. So I find that being happy and content and living a purposeful life is actually a foundation for a really good relationship and life. And then the second thing is, I think it's very important to be 100% present, whatever you do. It's much better to be 15 minutes of quality time with, for example, my daughter, than like 2 hours on Slack and email on my phone while she's, whatever, playing with me. So I find that if you are like in the zone with everything you do, even if it's 5 things every day, you can have much deeper relationships with people as well. And it's not easy. I mean, I struggle with it all the time, but that's a key thing for me. And then the third one is, there's a question about work-life balance. I like to use this term work-life harmony, meaning that sometimes, you work 18 hours a day, and then sometimes you work 7 hours a day. But this idea that, you should just give everything you have to your company, I think is stupid. We all have the same amount of one currency in life, same amount in a bucket is time. So then the question is, how do you allocate your time? And allocating all your time into your company, like at the end of your life, like who the fuck cares? Like you put 100% of your time into that. Like, does anyone really care? No. And then secondly, I believe that if you have a balanced portfolio of what you do, you're so much more creative and you can be so much more successful with your company. So that's kind of the second thing for me, that I try to block times for different things. And if you sweat the big stuff in everything that you do, it's actually amazing how much crap there, like you can sort of end up wasting a lot of time in everything in life if you don't know like what's truly important. I don't know, but it's work in progress.
We have a question back here.
Thank you, Sami, for sharing. I wonder how you come up with the formula. What are most important? Like, what are the big stuffs that you would sweat? How do you prioritize both in life and at work?
That's a good question. How do I prioritize? For company, it's a little easier, but to me, the key thing is the process. Like the number one thing is just to think about them is super, super helpful. And you're going to think I'm a planner crazy after you hear what I'm going to tell you about my personal life. That's fine, because I don't really care what others think about me. So I actually created a 15-year plan for myself. And then I refresh it every year, and I have 5-year goals and 1-year goals in all these areas of life. And then I have an inner scorecard, which I copied from Warren Buffett, not the contents, but the idea that at the end of each week or month, I score my life based on my inner scorecard, which does not include anything that has dollar signs or TechCrunch headlines or anything else. So that's my process for myself. And then I look at it maybe once a month, like, am I living the most amazing life that I can based on my plan? And then at the end of each year, I kind of go through my whole annual plan and create a new plan. And that has the sort of what's meaningful and important to me in my life, whether that's having impact in the world, helping people, my family, my friends, my mental game, sports, adventures, those sort of things. So I use that kind of planning process. For company, you want to have a little bit faster cycle. So that could be a longer conversation. But I think the number one is that you establish some sort of a cadence into that planning. And the most important thing for early stage companies, in my opinion, is sort of a massive transformative purpose or mission, whatever that is. If you know, that's kind of like the North Star. What are we trying to do? And then later you can introduce more process, whether that's weekly or daily or monthly or quarterly. Currently my company is about 50 people. So we have one giant 10-year goal to cure certain diseases. And then we do 90-day planning cycles. And then of course the teams, iterate every day, but we have sort of a 90-day planning cycle. Yes.
Hello, my name is Eric. Thank you so much for speaking. I wanted to ask, you mentioned while you were rowing from Monterey to Hawaii, you saw whales jumping, dolphins jumping, sharks, jumping around. What were some of the crazier days you had, crazier things you saw during your row? I'd love to hear about that.
Yes. We kind of saw like one of each. So it's not like we saw a crazy number of amazing animals that you would only see on Animal Planet or somewhere. But I would say the two things that come to mind is one, you see these container ships going here in the bay, and it's like, they are sort of an everyday occurrence. It's not special. But when you're in a freaking small rowboat in the Pacific and you see those container ships coming from somewhere, the feeling of realizing that they don't see you, if they hit you, good luck. So they aren't animals, but those were kind of the scariest moments. And it can happen in the middle of the night. Then our electronics broke, so our sort of radar detection system didn't work. So some of those moments where they went reasonably nearby were perhaps more shocking. In terms of animals, what was most amazing? Well, this sounds silly, but to have birds that fly around in the middle of the Pacific 1,200 miles from the shore or any island was just unbelievable. And then there were a couple who became kind of friends. We're like, where did this? It's kind of crazy to think about. We saw all kinds of fish, but you kind of get used to it. So those two, birds and container ships, sounds pretty ordinary. It's definitely worth 45 days and almost having a divorce. I guess you could just go to the ferry building and you have plenty of birds and container ships.
Another question garnering a good number of upvotes.
How do you draw the line between the perfect product versus having just enough to go to market? I personally have a huge bias towards done is 1,000 times better than well planned or polished 2 weeks later, simply because you just don't know. It's a sausage factory thing that you don't know for the most part. There are moments in time when you want to make it perfect. And, Apple is doing it in a different way, but it's when you have that kind of a platform and suddenly you have like 50 million people potentially immediately buying it, it's a little different. But I have a huge bias towards out as quickly as possible, unless it's some special thing that you literally launching into the world. But that rarely happens for startups. So I have a huge bias towards basically having just enough to go to market. In my company currently, we have reasonably high bar because we actually take care of very, very sick people. And so we have responsibility for their lives, basically. So you obviously have to do a whole different level of quality control and make sure your product delivers and run clinical trials and all that kind of stuff. On that note, I have thought of some of these companies that are recreating schools, and I've thought of it like, would I send my kid into the MVP school that may screw up the first 6 years of her education, and then we realize it 18 years later that it was actually the MVP? Probably not, but It depends on which industry you are, but if it's like this kind of app, I would just, or online service, I would really err on the side of out as quickly as possible.
So next question's for you.
Thank you.
No worries. Hi, I'm Irina. Congrats for humor. I like it a lot. As a co-founder, I completely agree. Not as a big company as yours, but you always make sausages and people think we're diamonds. And if they see on TechCrunch, they think it's a big deal. And you're like, no, it's just bigger problems and more responsibility. But like you moved on, you're doing another company. And probably, I don't know how many times it happened to you, but to us at least happens pretty often to be like, okay, that's enough. We've tried it, it's not working, or it's too much of a hassle, we should move on. Like, when do you understand that actually it's okay to move to a different sausage? or actually, you're still gonna make that one and keep going? Because I'm pretty sure there's those moments, right, when you're just like, okay, that's enough, different one.
Yeah, I sometimes I like to say that the number one reason companies fail is because the founders stop trying. If you just the company does not fail until the founders stop trying. This is a simplification, but that's how I think about it. But that's a tough question. That's a very tough question. And I don't have a perfect answer to you. But I would say that the number one reason companies fail because the founders stop trying. And that's one of the reasons that I think is very, very important, that the initial spark or the motivation that one has when you start a company is so deep. It's more emotional than sort of analytical, and you feel like you really just need to make it happen. A lot of people have asked me how do I come up with the right idea? What kind of process should I use? I used to work for McKinsey company, which is this wonderful consulting company. I don't know how many of you know, but one of the things that they teach you is problem solving. And you can definitely have all kinds of spreadsheets and models and approaches to figure out a business that would make analytically sense, but it is the worst possible way to start a company, because you have no personal connection or some sort of a deeper. The thing is, we are, no matter how smart you think you are, you're an emotional human being, and your emotions drive way more of your behavior than any kind of analytics or left-brain thinking. And certainly when the going gets tough, it's even more emotion. So I have a bias towards never giving up, but obviously there is a point when it doesn't make sense. But I found that when, like my current company that I'm building, the problem is so personal and meaningful, and I know we can solve it. Like, we're never going to stop.
When did you change from that one to this one? Was that because you thought that you've done enough, or what was the reason?
With Trulia?
Yeah.
That was because I started the company for reasons that were unrelated to the industry. So I started the company because I was so excited about creating something from scratch in the Silicon Valley. That's why I came to the country. To me, getting here legally, which I was able to get through Stanford because they give you a visa, was like the dream for a actor or actress to go to Hollywood. And that process I was like, I don't care if it's a soap opera or horror movie, I don't care. Like, this is gonna be so amazing. And that was basically the driving force for me. And it was phenomenal, and it was amazing, and I was so happy. But when you do that for 8 years, and you're like, oh, we have a company, we have 500 people, we are profitable, public, blah, 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 but it's like, I'm looking at Mai because she worked with me. It was a phenomenal experience and amazing people, but the industry, it's like, oh, now I've built the company, but there wasn't anything in me that said, this problem was built for me, and I'm going to spend the next 20 years doing. And so why did I leave? It was an emotional decision, basically. It wasn't analytical. It was like, when you start feeling like you're going to work every day, as a founder, something's not right. And it's difficult to then sort of turn that around, wherever that's coming from. And by the way, you get that feeling very, very quickly if you start a company for analytical reasons as opposed to emotional reasons.
Thank you. You mentioned that you used you recorded the lessons learned from each training block during your triathlon training, and that helped you compound your learning. Did you use any system for that, or did you just simply find thinking about it and writing it down achieve the learning and the compounding of knowledge?
Yeah. For the sport specifically, I had pretty detailed logs of everything that I did, but frankly, the analysis was pretty much just pattern recognition with my own brain. So going through and looking at like well, obviously I had performance stats for the event, so I could tell what improved, what didn't, and then I could go back and look at what did I do differently. So I guess I had a lot of data.
And you took the time to...
Yeah, I took the time. Yeah, in fact, I did it immediately after, like on my way home in a plane or something. Like I always did immediately, the same day.
Do we want to take a few more from the board?
How do you stay focused on the big stuff when there's so many moving parts and so much to do? There are two things. One is that ASCII text file that I have. I literally write this is the stuff that matters between now and forever. This is what I need to accomplish this quarter, and this is what I need to accomplish this week. And every Sunday I go through this, and I update like what are the 3 things or so that matter this week. And then what we use is we have a Slack channel where I ask every team member to post the top 3 things for that week and the top 3 things last week. So I've tried to kind of encourage everyone. It's not a micromanagement tool for me to see what everyone else is doing. It's more to some extent force people to go through that thinking. So there was this question like, how do you figure out? Well, the number one thing is to just take like 5 minutes or 10 minutes to write down what matters. So there's like peer accountability. So that's one thing that I just go through that thinking all the time. And then the second thing is, and this kind of goes to the work-life harmony as well, I've structured my calendar pretty aggressively. So like every morning from 7:30 to 10 is my work, creative work, whatever that is, except people stuff, interviews, and then customer meetings can sort of override that. But 7:30 to 10, every day, Monday through Friday, is when I work and get the shit done that I need to get done. So that's one example, that you actually have that time, so it's not like, oh, we need to do this and this and that. And then by like 11, I've kind of done my most important work every day. And then after that, it's meetings, interviews, emails, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's, in practice, it's not that clean because everything gets, you know, everything's like a sausage factory. So but in an ideal world, that's what I do. It works pretty well.
Usually the second to last question. We have room for one more question after this.
Thank you. Firstly, books can be very enlightening. Could you recommend one that has helped you on the way? And second question, you mentioned 15-year plan. That got me very intrigued. Can you disclose any parts of that plan?
Year by year, quarter by quarter. So what the first question was who? Was it who?
A book.
A book. A book that's, give me a little bit of hint, like just an interesting book in general, or?
That, what has motivated you or you found inspirational or somewhat powerful to your life?
Yeah. I like reading biographies. Within this theme, I would highly recommend Phil Knight's Shoe Dog. How many of you have read it? Okay, so there's one. So Phil Knight's the founder of Nike. I really enjoyed it. Super inspirational. And you might think today like, oh, it's the diamond foundry, diamonds. It was freaking sausage factory. And when you read it, you realize what it takes to be successful and what it takes to really have impact in the world. It's ridiculously hard work, ton of luck. It's just phenomenally inspirational book. In fact, it's probably the only book where I've read any part 3 times. I didn't read the whole book 3 times, but it's just super inspirational. And that's sort of from the past couple of years. So Phil Knight's Shoe Dog, I would say that. And then the other one was the 15-year. Actually, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to make myself look even crazier, which is even a better exercise, which I've done a couple of times, is write 3 speeches, 3 people that you'd like to give a speech at your 80th birthday party, and write those speeches. That was a powerful exercise for me. And then you look back of your 15-year, 5-year, 1-year goals and think about, am I allocating my time in the right way? Oh no. Gives very nice perspective. So I dodged a bullet. Yep. Okay. Keep going. Is bootstrapping okay, or how long do you do it? I mean, if you can do it, oh, nice. Okay, so let's think about this carefully. So I was in a fortunate position starting my current company that I had created enough wealth that I didn't have to sort of be running after cash immediately. So I had the luxury of choosing kind of like how to go about this. And I very quickly wanted to raise outside capital from the kinds of entities that think like capitalists would think. And I have found it extremely helpful because it forces you to really think about how do you allocate your time and your resources, and keeps you honest. And it's extremely helpful. If you have the luxury of being able to kind of start generating immediate revenues and profits that you can really use to cash flow to drive your business, I personally then, obviously, oftentimes when you raise capital, you get sort of 3 things. You get capital, you get governance, and you get guidance. But you can separate those 3, capital, governance, guidance. So if you get capital from your cash flow, think about where you get governance and guidance. And I feel that people may have a temptation to say, I don't want governance, I just want to be my own boss, I want to make all the decisions. I don't think it's the optimal way to succeed. It's kind of like, yeah, you can run a marathon on your own, but if you want to get to the Olympic Games, you probably want to have a coach. So it's the same thing, like, yeah, you can run a nice business on your own, but if you want to get to the Olympic Games, which in tech, everything's in Olympic Games, because you have to be like always on your toes and moving forward. Unless you have a tiny niche that nobody really cares, then you may be able to build your little, the word that should not be on record anywhere, little monopoly. But pretty much everything else, you either number 1 or you're going to be eaten alive. So then if you think about it that way, I want to be number 1, well, it's the Olympic Games. So then you have to like best people, best investors, best governance, best advice. If you don't have that, you're out of business. So I think bootstrapping is awesome, but then I would think about, if you don't need the capital from an outside source that brings the governance and advice, I would think about where to get the advice and governance. Did we have one more or no? Or? There was one question that got a lot of votes, so that's what I was trying to read, but I couldn't multitask. Is it important to know if your idea is scalable, and if you have a business model earlier, is it okay to develop that later on and just focus on solving a problem? I think you have to know how you are going to create value. I think it's preferable to know how you're going to create value. Now, in a consumer internet world, one of my investors, who I respect as an entrepreneur a lot, Ev Williams, said, I don't know a single consumer internet company that has had millions and millions of users that has not been able to monetize it. And I think that's a pretty safe statement. So if you're in sort of the consumer collecting eyeballs and users, I don't think you have to worry about how exactly you monetize. Where's the link? Where's the ad? Do I sell data? What do I do? Like if you get whatever number, big number, 50 million people using your stuff for free, congratulations. Your problems have pretty much been solved, especially if they are engaged long-term users. But if it's not that, then yes, absolutely. I think it's very, very important to think about what is the value that my solution is creating here. If you don't see that, then I think that's a real problem.
Thank you, Sami, so much for coming.